Okay, today's daf we're going to learn is Yoma Nun Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Jody Lee Lam in memory of her beloved father, Rabbi Maurice Lam, Moshe ben Meir Shmuel. He, with joy, purpose, and an absolute abundance of love, he was full of joy, purpose, and an absolute abundance of love for his family. He was patient, kind, and wise. It's because of my father that I learned the daf, and I feel his presence in every word of Torah I read. May our learning give him pride, and may his neshama have an aliyah. We're going to start Daf Nun Gimel from the top, Tanu Rabbanan. We're going to start with the famous machloket between the Prushim and the Tzdukim about how to do the Ktoret on Yom Kippur. We're going to talk about how did the Kohen do the incense before he went into the temple, the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies, or once he was already inside. Tanu Rabbanan. V'natana taktoret al ha'esh lifnei Hashem. Says you bring the Ktoret on the fire before God. So now, what do we learn from there? So you can't. So what do we learn? It says you put the Ktoret on the fire before God. That means you're standing before God when you do it. That means don't make the fire outside and then come in. That was the way we described it yesterday, right? You only make the fire, the smoke, when you're inside the Kodesh Kodeshim. This is to say we don't agree with the Tzdukim who say that you're supposed to do the smoke outside and then go in with the fire, right, with the smoke already smoking up. My darush, what was their interpretation? Ki ba'anan era'eh la kaporet. It says, how will I be seen on the kaporet? With an anan. In other words, you can't see me. You can't go into the Kodesh Kodeshim without there being a cloud there. Only with a cloud can you come into the Kodesh Kodeshim. That's the way they understand. Right? The simple reading of that verse seems to imply what the Tzdukim say, which is you can't just walk into Kodesh Kodeshim without there being some sort of barrier between you and God. The cloud has to be there in the first place. According to the Prushim, you come in and you create the cloud. You're there for a short time before the cloud goes up. Amru lahem chachamim. The rabbis say, "V'halo kvar ne'emar," but it was already said, "V'natana taktoret ala esh lifnei Hashem." It says, what about our pasuk that we just quoted? You do it before God, meaning when you're already in there. So they say, "Im kem ma tamud lomar ki ba'anan era'eh la kaporet." So what do the rabbis do with the verse that the Tzdukim use as their proof? Im kem ma tamud lomar ki ba'anan era'eh la kaporet v'lamed shenotem ba ma'aleh Hashem. It's focusing on the fact that this anan needs to be created over the kaporet. How do you create an anan over the kaporet? By using the herb or the plant, ma'aleh ashan, that we learned about when we talked about the Beit of Tinas, that they're the only ones who knew it. That basically, if you remember, it makes the smoke go up straight. Then we're going to see it scatters then it kind of goes up to the ceiling, goes to the sides, and from there it drops down. And then the anan will entirely cover the kaporet. That's what they learn from the pasuk ki ba'anan era'eh la kaporet. How the anan is supposed to look when they go in and make the cloud, not where they're supposed to do it, and that they can't go in without it being done. Now the Braita says something very strange. So they already just learned from the verse ki ba'anan era'eh la kaporet that you have to put ma'aleh ashan. The next question of the Braita makes absolutely no sense then, because it says uminayin shenotem ba ma'aleh ashan, and how do you know that you're supposed to put the ma'aleh ashan in the incense? Shene'emar v'chisa anan haktoret et hakaporet. The first verse we quoted was that I will appear only, right? You can only come into the Kodesh Kodeshim with a cloud, meaning when you come into Kodesh Kodeshim, create this cloud. Then it says, we learn from another verse that where it says, also in the section of Yom Kippur, that v'chisa anan haktoret et hakaporet, that the smoke of the Ktoret will cover the kaporet. So now they say that is going to teach us that you have to put ma'aleh ashan. Well, this seems very strange. We just said the other verse is teaching you about ma'aleh ashan, and now we have a second verse that's teaching you about ma'aleh ashan. Something doesn't jive here. We'll have to deal with that in a few minutes. In any case, let's continue the Braita. Ha lo natan ba ma'aleh ashan. You learn from here that if you didn't put ma'aleh ashan in the incense, or one of the ingredients was missing, chayav mita. Okay, you're liable for death. Why are you liable for death? Because it says, right? It says, There's actually two verses, and we'll see them in a minute. One is Pasuk Bet of that chapter in Vayikra, chapter 16. Vayomer Hashem Moshe, daber al Aaron achicha, speak to Aaron, your brother. God tells Moshe, va'al yavo b'chol et el hakodesh mibeit laparot. You can't just come anytime you want. El pnei kaporet asher al haaretz v'lo yamut, and then you won't die. Ki ba'anan era al kaporet. In other words, if you don't come in the right way, you will die. So here they said ki ba'anan era with the malei ashan. Also in the other pasuk where it says the vichisa, which is pasuk Yud Gimel in that chapter, the 13th verse. That's the beginning. The first verse is kind of the intro to the section. Then when we actually get to the Kohen creating the incense, it says, the cloud will cover the kaporet. Asher alayidut. The kaporet was this cover on top of the Aron. It was a gold cover. We'll see it on Daf Nun Hey to discuss it more. Asher alayidut v'lo yamut, and you won't die. Both these verses, by the way, mention death. We'll get to that soon. And they both talk about this ananik. And they basically say, from here, you see, it's not necessarily saying which verse, but one of them, it's clear that if you don't do this properly, and with the malei ashan, since they both refer to malei ashan, and they both say you're going to die. If you do it wrong, it means without the malei ashan, the Kohen's going to die. If he basically offers an inappropriate, the improper incense. So now they say, wait a minute, he's going to die for a different reason, not just because he offered. It's not because the incense has to be complete with the malei ashan and you took an incense that wasn't complete, but tepukle de kama'ayil bi'are kanit. You're coming into the Kodesh Kodashim for no reason. Why for no reason? Because you have to come in with the appropriate Torah. So if you come in, it's not just that you burned the wrong incense in the Kodesh Kodashim. It's that you went into Kodesh Kodashim for no purpose whatsoever, and you're not allowed to go in with no purpose whatsoever, because if you come in with a Torah that's disqualified, then your burning of the incense was a useless act, in which case you went into Kodesh Kodashim for absolutely no reason. So they say, why are you saying it's because it's missing part of the Torah? It's because you went into the temple for no reason. So now we're going to have two, what we call nafkaminas, two practical ramifications of the difference between these two opinions, or these two concepts. Now, why, even if you're going to be obligated death, obviously, if you're obligated death, you don't need to say you're obligated death for two reasons. Once you have one, you're going to die anyway. It doesn't matter that you have a second one. But the idea here is that if you said just that you were missing, it was just because you went in for no reason and not because it was missing incense, there could be some cases where you wouldn't die if you had just said that. So where you wouldn't be killed, right? Again, it's death by the hands of God. So Amar Rav Sheshet, Hacha b'mayaskina, kigon sheshagag b'bi'ah v'hezi b'aktara. This is going to bring us back to our days of Masechet Shabbat, where we had all these things where you were shogeg about something and mazed about something else. You did part of it unwillingly, and a different thing you did on purpose, and what's your obligation, etc. So here, let's say you didn't know, okay? You forgot that it's forbidden to go into the Kodesh Kodashim for no reason. But you intentionally knew that your Torah was missing something, your incense, and you went in anyway and burnt it. So then you'll be obligated death for bringing an inappropriate incense, because that shouldn't have done that. It was disqualified. But you won't be obligated for going into the temple, into the Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, for no reason, because you didn't realize that you were going to get the death penalty if you did that. Again, death by God, but you didn't know. Rav Ashi Amar, you could still say it was intentional for both. I'll give you another practical application, meaning you knew you weren't allowed to go into the temple for no reason, into the Holy of Holies for no reason. And you knew that your incense was missing something, and you knew that it was forbidden to bring incense that was missing something. But how you would do this, I don't know. But you brought in two incenses, okay? Somehow, right? We already had the issue. How is he carrying the coal pan in one hand and the cup in the other? We figured that all out. But now somehow he brings two ladlefuls of incense. One is missing and one isn't missing. Now, in this case, you're not going to have a problem with bi'are kanit because he actually brought an appropriate incense. But he also brought an incense and offered it up that was incomplete. For that one, he's going to be obligated the death penalty. So liable to get the death penalty. So one was complete, one was missing. Abia lo mechayev, he's not going to be obligated for going into the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies, because he did bring an incense that was perfect. Haktara mechayev, but for burning incense, that's missing some part of it, right? He's going to be obligated, liable to come miktar ktoret chasera. Amarma. Now we're going to have we're going to go into the problem that I mentioned in that Braita. Uminayin shenotem b'malei Hasham was a question asked twice, and each time a different verse was brought, and they're even back to back, one right after the other. It's very strange. Talmud Lomar v'kisa, right? The second one is because it says v'kisa. Kra lekra, what? A pasuk for a pasuk, meaning we already learned it from a verse. Why do we have two? So for this, we're going to have a slew of answers as to what the first one is referring to and what the second one is referring to. So again, let's just review our two verses. We have Ki ba'anan era kaporet. I'm going to appear with that. You can come in and God's presence will kind of be noticed only behind a cloud. God will kind of show his kavod while the cloud is there. And number two, and that means it needs to have this malei ashan, so the cloud is the proper cloud. And the chisan anaktoret et akaporet. Right, when the Kohen actually does the avodah, it says, and the anan, the cloud, will cover the kaporet, which again teaches you need malei ashan. So why both? Amar Rav Yosef, there's a chart on the sheet which shows this all charted out. Hachi kama. This is what it says. Ein li ela ale malei ashan. Ikar malei ashan minayin. One is referring to the leaf of the malei ashan plant, and one is referring to the roots. So the first one is the leaves, and the second is the root. So how do we know the root also can be used? Talmud Lomar b'kisa. The second one comes, say, even the root. Abaye says, what are you talking about? It's the reverse. Titania's, it says in a Braita. It says the reverse in a Braita. What's the Braita say? You would put in it the root of the malei ashan. Here it explains. It would go up straight like a stick, like a staff, until it reached the ceiling. As soon as it reached the ceiling, the beams on the ceiling, it would basically spread to all the walls, and then the entire room would be filled with smoke. That's how the malei ashan works. So he says it's the root that they would use of the malei ashan, not the leaves. So Abaye basically says what Rav Yosef says, but flipped. This is what it means. Well, it's the opposite. The first pasuk comes to teach us the main halacha, which is the root. The second halacha comes to teach, even if you use just the leaves, it's still considered that it has the malei ashan in it. That's sufficient. And that you learn from the word bikisa. The gist of all these drashot is going to be bikisa must be adding something additional that we didn't know before. And that's the idea, because it repeats it. Rav Sheshet Amar, Ein li ela ol moed shebamidbar. This was all said to the Jews in the desert. So from there we can learn ol moed, the Mishkan, right? The ol moed of the Mishkan. It was in the desert. That we understand. This is how things go. But Shiloh Beit Olamim Minayin, how do you know that you also need the anan to come up like that, and therefore you need the malei ashan also in the Mishkan in future generations in Shiloh or Beit Olamim or in the Beit HaMikdash or any time wherever the Mishkan went. Talmud Lomar v'kisa. The second one comes to say this is for generations. But then they say, wait a minute, you don't need to learn that from the v'kisa. There's a better drasha for that. It says toward the end of the section of Yom Kippur service, it says, like you should do like this in Ol Moed HaShocheni Tam, that dwells with them wherever, or with you wherever you are, which means that throughout the generations, wherever God dwells, right, HaShochem, wherever the Shechina is, this is what you're going to do, which means you shouldn't learn it from the Chisa, so they reject his reason. Elahaki Kamar, so they suggest something instead. Ainli Ela b'Yom Kippurim. This teaches you about the incense on Yom Kippur, the first verse, because that's our topic. Bishar Yemot HaShana Minayin. But how do you know that the incense on all days of the year besides Yom Kippur also needs to have malei ashan? Because the verses are only talking about Yom Kippur. Talmud Lomar v'chisa. The second verse, even though it's still about Yom Kippur, the fact that it repeats it is repeating it to teach you that this is true for every day of the year. Another possibility, Rav Ashi Amal, Chad lemitzvah v'chad la'akev. Okay, the last two are going to be a little bit different. They're not going to say, this one's obvious, this one's less obvious. It's going to say, why are there two? One is to teach you it's a mitzvah, meaning you should do it like this with the Maleh Ashan. And the second is to say, it's me'akev. If you didn't do it, you haven't fulfilled your obligation. Because we've seen this many, many times. We keep repeating this. In the world of kodshim, things that happen in the temple, the rule of thumb is if something's repeated, it means that it's essential. So therefore, that's what it's telling you. One is to tell you, okay, there's a concept in the halacha, ein onshin elim kemazirim. You can't punish unless you were warned. And not only is this true for, you need to be warned before you get punished in the court, but the Torah needs to have warnings and punishments. For example, the section with the arayot of all the things you can't do, it appears in Vayikra Yud Chet, all the people you can't have relations with. It also appears in Parak Chaf. In one of them, it just says, don't. And the other one, it says, if you do this, you will get killed. Right? So one is the Asara, one is the Onesh. Now, I did mention to you before that both these verses mention V'lo Yamut, but one of them is more a warning, which is, Al Yavo B'cholei Tel HaKodesh, do not come anytime you want to the Kodesh Kodeshim. If you do, you will die. That's the warning. And the one, V'chisa, the second one, is coming to say, right, because it says, V'chisa anan aktoret et hakaporet, asher aleidu, v'lo yamut. That's coming to say, you will die if you don't do this. That's the punishment. So we have the warning and we have the punishment. Again, the warning is, if you don't do the Maleh Ashan properly, then you will die, right? If you don't put the Maleh Ashan into the incense offering, then you will die. Here we're going to have a braita to support Rava's reading, Tanya. So that was the end of our list of all the different possibilities as to what these two verses are coming to teach you. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Lo Yamut, Onesh, Ki ba'anan yira'eh, Asara. Here you see it exactly where he says this verse is the punishment, this verse is the warning. Yachol yu shnehem amurim kodem mitat b'nei Aaron. Now the braita is going on into something else. You might have thought that both of these were said before the sons of Aaron died. Okay, let me give you a little bit of background. In Sefer Vayikra, at the end of chapter 9, we have this moment where, there's Vayihi Bayom Hashmini, we're in the 8 days of the Milu, right? The 8 days of the Miluim. We get to the 7 days of the Miluim, and then the 8th day, God's presence rests in the Mishkan. This was the what's the word? The Chanukat Mishkan, the consecration. What's the word? The dedication of the Mishkan. So now it says at the end of chapter 9. So they blessed, Moshe and Aaron come in to Ol Moed, they blessed the people. The presence of God appears to everybody. We don't exactly know what that means, but there was some happened. The presence of God rested in the Mishkan. 2 psukim later, beginning of chapter 10, they each brought their machta, their pan. They put fire, right? This is they brought ktoret. This is almost like on Yom Kippur, right? It sounds similar. And they brought this fire, this foreign fire that God hadn't commanded them. And what happens? They basically die, right? They get eaten up by fire, right? After this unbelievable moment of Kvod Hashem dwelling in the Mishkan, 2 seconds later, something happens and they die. Okay, we don't know exactly what they did wrong. It's not clear from the verses. Our Gemara is going to get to that. It's going to bring one answer, but there's at least 10 or 15 answers as to what they did wrong. There's many, many opinions because it's not exactly clear from the verses. That's all in chapter 9 and 10. Skip a few chapters and you get to chapter 16, which says our chapter that we've been reading all along about Avodat Yom Kippurim. What we haven't focused on is the first verse in that chapter. It says there, God speaks to Moshe, Acharei mot shnei b'nei Haaron, b'karbatam l'fnei Hashem v'yamutu. It makes reference, that's why it's called Parshat Acharei mot, because it starts with, after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, before they came close before God and they died. And then it says, and then he says to Aaron, don't come, right? This is why some people say their sin was they went into Kodesh Kodeshim, because the next verse is, don't come into Kodesh Kodeshim anytime you want because you will die, which sounds like, oh, maybe that's why Nadav and Avihu died. It's not what our Gemara is going to say, but it's one of the reasons, and it's based on these verses. So in any case, they now say, let's go back to our Braita. So our Braita says, you might have thought, Shnehem amorim kodem mitat b'nei Aaron. Why you would have thought this, we're going to have to see in a minute. You might have thought that they were both said before the death of Bnei Aaron. In other words, we have this concept, ein mukdam u'meuchar b'Torah. The order is not important. So maybe these verses that God says, I will appear ba'anan, right? Ki ba'anan eira'eh la kaporet. That and the one, v'chisan on aktoret, and this is what will happen. Maybe all that was said before they died. Talmud Lomar, no, that's why it says, acharei mot shnei bnei Aaron, to teach you, no. This was all said after they died. That's very clear, right? Well, maybe not so clear. So now it seems like both those verses must have been said after they died. Talmud Lomar, no, but it says in the verse, Ki ba'anan era'eh la kaporet. It says, I will appear on the kaporet in a cloud, which sounds like era'eh is future. Okay, we're going to see this in the Gemara in a minute, but it means I will, meaning I haven't yet, which means that maybe chapter 9, when it says Vayera Kvod Hashem, right, the glory of God was revealed, maybe that hadn't happened yet, because it says only in this way, era'eh, in the future I will be seen on a kaporet. So how could this be? So they say the warning of Ki ba'anan era'eh la kaporet, that was said before. And the one second, right? And the onesh, the punishment, the pasuk that says v'chisa anan aktoret, and then right, if not, you will die. That was said after they died. So they're basically saying one of these verses is a little bit out of place. My Talmud, how did they get from that verse? And this is what I already explained because it was hard to read this without explaining that. Meaning I will be seen, but I haven't yet been seen. So they assume, again, this all just shows that there was a warning and there was a punishment told, and they were actually told at different times. The Elamai Tami Anush. So now they say, so why were the sons of Aaron punished? So again, as I said, there's many reasons given. This gives one reason. Kedetanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Lo meitu bnei Aaron ela al shehuru halacha b'fnei Moshe Rabban. They pasked halacha without going to Moshe. Okay, they decided for themselves. Now maybe they were right, but they shouldn't have done it without going to Moshe. They should have consulted with him about whether they were supposed to bring their own fire. My darush, what was their thinking? It says they should bring an esh al mizbeach. Even though the fire was supposed to come down from God, they thought that we're also supposed to do our part, and we're supposed to also bring a fire. So they might have been right about that, but they decided it on their own without consulting with Moshe, and that was their problem. Okay, there's a whole bunch of different reasons. Some people say they were drunk. Some people say they brought a foreign ketoret, like we've been talking about the ketoret they're not the right one. Some people said they did it without the clothing of the kuna. There's a whole slew of answers. I'm not going to give you all of them. Okay. Now we're back to, and here we're going to get off on a tangent. If you think sometimes this isn't really related to our lives, today we're going to see some things that we do every day that come from here. What happened? The Kohen goes in, right? And then he walks out the exact same path he took, but he doesn't turn around and go out backward, right, the other way. He walks backwards, facing the exact same direction he faced as he came in. So the exact path he took, he takes again, but now he's walking backwards. So that, what's the reason? So he doesn't turn his face on God. This is like, and this is where we get it from, people go visit the kotel, they back away, right? Some people take 3 steps back. Some people walk the whole way back till they don't see the kotel anymore. Some people till the area right before the kotel, right? There's all different customs. Comes from here. You're supposed to leave, right, the way you came and not turn your back on God. It's disrespectful. Minani mile, where do we get this from? Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, Amar Ka. The pasuk says, "Vayavo Shlomo labama asher begivon Yerushalayim." The context here is that Shlomo went to Givon, which was where the Mishkan was at the time, and he brought some sacrifices. And then it says, "Vayavo Shlomo labama asher begivon Yerushalayim." Okay, which basically means he went back to Yerushalayim. Givon is right. Shemesh begivon dom v'yareach be'emek hayalon. It's somewhere near Modi'in, Givon, and basically what it's saying is there's no such thing as Givon Yerushalayim. So it's to compare Givon to Yerushalayim. How so? What does this have to do with anything? They're to say that when he left Givon, he left the same way that he came. When he went to the bama, he obviously was facing the bama. So when he leaves, the bama, right, is the Mishkan. When he leaves, he basically has to backtrack and be watching with his face on the Mishkan. He can't turn his face. And likewise, the Kohanim, when they do their avodah in the temple, this is how they go in and go out. When the Levim go to stand on the duchan to sing, they go in that way, they go out the same way, meaning they always face, right? This is why they walk backwards. Israel b'mamadam, when the Jews come in, the people who would do the tefillot, there was always every week, we talked about this, there was a different group of people from Israel who were in charge of davening that the sacrifice would be accepted. They would also go out the same way. They wouldn't just turn their face and walk out. Okay, they would leave their face in that direction and walk backwards. Not only that, if you're a student, when you leave your rabbi, you do the same thing. And now we're going to hear some stories. Same thing with Rabbi Elazar, when he would leave, they would split ways. Now we're going to see two ways they would split. There's two options. Either Rabbi Yochanan would leave the room or Rabbi Elazar would leave the room. Rabbi Yochanan the Saguye. If Rabbi Yochanan would leave the room first, have a gachin kai Rabbi Elazar aduchte. He would bow, like crouch down on his feet or his knees. Ad have mikase Rabbi Yochanan minei. He would stay in place until Rabbi Yochanan couldn't be seen anymore. The Karav Abai Rabbi Elazar l'Saguya, if he would want to leave first, he would walk backwards until he couldn't see Rabbi Yochanan anymore. Rava Karav Mitar Minei de Rabbi Yosef. Okay, now you might, I know I think this sometimes when I'm at the Kotel and you see these people walking backwards for a while, and there's lots of people at the Kotel and you think this looks a little bit dangerous. So let's see what the Gemara has to say about that. So the Gemara tells the story of Rava. When he would leave Rav Yosef, who was his superior, right, his senior, and we always think of Rava as this great rabbi, but Rav Yosef was the generation before him. So Rava had this respect for Rav Yosef. He would walk backwards until what? He would basically get injured on his feet, get all bloody. He would knock himself because he wasn't paying attention to where he was walking. He would get all bloody and the blood would drip on the threshold of Rav Yosef. First of all, the image in my head, right? You see this blood all on the floor, which is exactly what we're going to see in what we're about to get to the blood of the bull. We're going to start with that today. Sprinkling the blood, and you sprinkle the blood and it goes on the floor of the Kodesh Kodeshim, right? I don't know who cleans that stuff, right? It ends up like this big mess of blood on the floor in the Holy of Holies. And basically, you have this image of blood on the floor, on the threshold. It's very interesting because there ends up also this idea of blood on the floor in the temple. So anyway, full of blood. Now, Rav Yosef was blind. So Rav Yosef didn't see any of this. He didn't see that Rava was walking in this way. Right? So it's interesting. It's not respect necessarily for your rabbi to see, but it's respect for others to see how you treat your rabbi. And Amrula, Rav Yosef, Hachi Avi Rava. They said to Rav Yosef, look what Rava did. He got a bloody mess on your steps. Amarle, right? And almost like, how could he do this? At least it's a possible way of reading this, that kind of he was, they had to tell him. And also maybe they were saying, could he really have done this, right? He made a mess. Is this what's supposed to be done? Amarle, let's see his reaction. Yehe Rava ditarum reshech akule kracha. It should be my bracha to you, to Rava, that his head will be raised upon the entire city, meaning he should become the Rosh Hashiva, which in fact he does become over time. So he blessed him for doing that. He said, anyone who has such kavod the Torah, even to the extent that he bruises himself, which is interesting because you would think that you wouldn't do this, right? He obviously is showing this to an extreme way that, he's worthy of becoming the Rosh Hashiva because of the respect he shows to the Torah. So there you have it. If you're a little bit thinking that, it's not really appropriate, according to the Gemara, for sure, you should do that, even if it's dangerous, and even if you'll bump into someone, and even if you might knock someone over, right? Obviously there, it's a little dangerous. There's a lot of elderly people, and maybe you really should still be careful. I don't know if you have aspirations to be a Rosh Hashiva, maybe in that case, maybe it's okay, but if you're not at that level, maybe not. So good food for thought, what you should do. Amar Rabbi Alexandri, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Now another practical example, which you might not have thought about, that it's connected to this. You ever wonder why we go back 3 steps and then go forward 3 steps? So really the issue is, you'll see from the Gemara, the important part is not to go back forward 3 steps. It's really to go back 3 steps. And what's the idea? We're parting from God. So just like we part from the Kodesh Kodeshim, we walk backwards. Just like we part from a rabbi, we go backwards. Likewise, when you part from davening in front of God, you go 3 steps backwards. Okay? And then you should give shalom. First of all, we say the words, shalom b'marav. Maybe that's connected. But what does it mean you give shalom? So there's a bunch of different interpretations. One is what we do, which is you bow like a person, right? We bow to the left one, then we bow to the right, and then we bow in the middle. That's a way of kind of greeting someone. We don't greet people like that anymore, really. But there are, in those days, maybe that's how people greeted people. They bowed in front of them as a way of greeting someone. So you back off and you greet. It's almost like a way of saying shalom to God. Some people say you're supposed to go 3 steps back and then go start talking to other people. Meaning, right, you're in shul and you basically you back off, and then you basically want to say, okay, I'm finished with my prayer. Now I'm going to go say shalom to somebody else to show that I'm no longer in the place of sanctification that I was a minute ago, right? That I'm in a different place right now, right? That's an interesting one because we don't do that. Anyway, we obviously go by the other interpretation I said. Amar le, and we're going to have a whole discussion about this now. Amar le Rav Mordechai, kevan shepasah shalosh psiot lacharav, hatami bai le lameka. Okay, you can ask yourself this question. When you go 3 steps back, do you immediately go forward? So according to this, you have to stand in your place. And the Rif says you're supposed to stand in your place until what point? And there's many people who do this, until the Shliach Tzibor, the Chazan, starts repeating Shemona Esrei, or starts Kedusha, some people say. Because the idea isn't go back and go forward, but the idea is go back, and that's your way of saying, okay, God, I was in front of you, now I'm moving back, and then you wait. You don't go immediately forward. You wait a certain period of time. Some people say you have to do like the Rif says. Some people say it's not la halacha. You could go forward again, but just wait a little bit. I was thinking maybe that's why they added that Yehiratzon at the end of davening, so that you wait a little bit, because it's part of the tefillah, because otherwise you can't rely on people waiting, right? We all know how impatient people get when they daven and, okay, I'm done, let's move on. So maybe they added the Yehiratzon so that people will be back there and won't walk forward right away. So now we're going to say, why does he need to stand? Mashal talmidan iftar me'rabo. It's like a student who leaves his rabbi. Im chozer la'alter. If you kind of, go leave and then you go right back, it's like spitting in his face almost. It's like a kelev who starts vomiting and then swallows his vomit. Like, well, there was no point to vomit if you're going to swallow it back in. It's a point to vomit if you're going to vomit, but it's a strange image to conjure right here. But the idea is that you're almost, it's like you just went back to show respect and then you're going right back forward again as if you didn't really do anything. Tanya Namihachi, here's a brighter to support. Okay, exactly what we said. And if you didn't do it, it was better you didn't pray at all. Okay, this is a strong way of saying you better do this. Now, what I told you is you go left and then right. This says you go right and then left. So why does he say that? That means God gave the Torah with fire and with his right hand. So therefore, we should bow to the right. From your left side, if there's 1,000 mizikim there, things trying to get at you, or a rivava, or 10,000 on your right, which shows that your right is much stronger than your left. Okay, the continuation is, no matter what, God can protect you. Elecha lo yigash, they won't fall upon you because God will protect you. But the point is that on the right is much stronger. So therefore, you should bow to the right. So first they say, Maiva Omer, why do you need those 2 verses? One would have been enough. Not necessarily. Everybody's right-handed. Now, even though it's not true, I happen to be left-handed, but the majority are right-handed. So of course, God gave the Torah with his right because it was just given with the hand that people would use for giving. But therefore, they use the second pasuk, Tashma, which shows that the yamin is stronger, right? That there's more power to the yamin, and that's why yamin. So Rava Chazila Abaye, Rava saw Abaye, Diyav Shlama liyamina beresha. He bowed first to the right and then to the left. By the way, if you notice here, it doesn't talk about bowing in the middle. We do left, right, middle. It doesn't really talk about the middle here. Amarle, misavart liyamin didach. Lismol didach kamina dahava yamino shalakadosh baruch hu. Rava says to Abaye, you're doing something wrong here. Yes, it's right, but not your right. It's the right of God, right? How many times you stand opposite someone and they say, oh, the right, but it's whose right? Is it my right or your right? So it's to the right of God. And therefore, you had it all wrong. Another evidence, they saw Abaye and Rava would bow, they would bow, crouch down and do all the bowing in one bow, basically. They wouldn't get up and down and up and down and up and down each time. They would stay down the whole time. Okay, so that was a whole aside about how to daven, how to end your davening from God. Maybe it's this nice idea that, we should think of ourselves as leaving the Kodesh Kodeshim every day. When we move away from our prayer, it's this idea of we're parting from God. Okay, so if you never knew why you did that, now you have this concept of it's the way we part from God, and therefore don't rush back and go right back to where you were standing before, but go back your 3 steps, think about it a little bit, and then go forward. Now, if you remember, the Kohen Gadol would say the short prayer in the Hechal when he gets out of the Kodesh Kodeshim, right? He leaves there, and then immediately, remember, no one's in the Hechal because no one's allowed to be in the Hechal, sanctuary area, when he's in the Holy of Holies. So he's there by himself, and he says this short prayer. He shouldn't stay too long because people will get scared that he died. My matzle, what does he say? Okay, both of them, they seem to be brothers, said, this is a short prayer, that it should be a year full of rain and heat. So Gemara says, is heat a good thing, right? I live in Ranan, I can tell you this, in the summer, heat is not really a good thing, right? Is heat such a good thing? If it's hot, it should be a rainy, right? Because obviously the hotter it is, the more rain you're going to need. So if it's a hot year, make sure there's a lot of rain. He would say the following. This is good, relevant for today. Don't let the ruler leave. I don't know how I'm trying to say it. Don't always keep it within the house of Beit David, right? We want our rulers to always be from the house of Beit David, right? This is don't change the dynasty of rulership, right? We have a new government in Israel after many, many years. So it's an interesting connection here of, whether it's a good thing or not to have a change in government. And the people shouldn't have to rely on each other for parnasah, meaning everyone should be able to make his own livelihood and not have to rely on tzedakah. And don't accept the prayers of the travelers, because the travelers always pray for no rain, but everyone else needs rain. And in that light, we're going to have a very famous story of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who is known to have a lot of power, and certainly his prayer had a lot of power, and it's learned from this story. He was walking on the path. He was one of these travelers. The rain started coming upon him. He said, God, what? Everyone else is happy because it's raining, but I am suffering here. Pasak Mitra, the rain stops. When he gets home, now I'm comfortable in my own home, but everyone else is upset because there's no rain. Ata Mitra, and the rain came down. Okay, very interesting story. A lot to be said about this. How on earth could he have prayed for no rain just for himself? It's a little bit strange. Most people say he wasn't really praying. He was just saying to God, like, maybe bring me a raincoat or something, bring me some protection somehow, or maybe he was just commenting, and God loved him so much that he immediately stopped the rain for him, right? And at least what you see here was temporary. He only wanted it, even if you do say he prayed for it just till he got home. We don't know how long a trek it was, and then immediately he took care of everybody else. It's interesting. It's an interesting story here, to which the reaction of the Gemara is very interesting. Amar Rav Yosef, Maya Hanya Leitzlote de Kohen Gadol Legabe Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. He says, here we are talking about the Kohen Gadol and his avot and Yom Kippur and his prayer, and you think the Kohen Gadol is the most powerful person in the world, and they say he is nothing compared to Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. Because look at Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa. He didn't need to go to Kodesh Kodeshim. He didn't need to do anything. He didn't need the prep of 7 days. All he did was make this one line, and God, in a snap, listened to him. And this is part of what we've been discussing all throughout, that there's this tension between the Kiuna Gdola and the, right, again, thinking back to what's going on in Israel and the government forming a government, coalition agreements, all those issues. Here you have it. There's the constant This one wants more power than the other. And the rabbis here were, first of all, post-temple. So we want to show the rabbis are more important because there really are no Kohanim Gedolim anymore. But even in the time of the temple, there was always this tension between them. And they're trying to say, look, we're the rabbis. We are the ones who are able to influence things much more so than the Kohanim. It's very interesting because we're in the middle of how amazing this Avodah Yom Kippurim was. And all of a sudden we get, well, Kohanim Gedolim, they didn't really have that much power. Tanu Rabbanan. Here we go with a maaseh again, another good story. Maaseh b'kohen gadol echad she'erich b'tfilato. He davened for too long. V'nimnu achiv ha'kohanim likanes acharav. They were ready. They kind of voted, okay, we're going to go in, even though they're not allowed to go in. But they said he might have died. If he died, obviously someone's got to go in. So it says here what happened. They start to go in and immediately he comes out, right? This is what always happens, right? You're waiting. You finally decide to do something and then all of a sudden it happens. So he starts coming out. Amrulo. Now, imagine you're in your house, you're waiting for someone to get home. They haven't gotten home, right? You're worried sick about one of your kids. They didn't show up. You can't reach them. Their cell phone's not on. You don't know where they are. All of a sudden they show up in the house. Now you have two reactions. One could be, oh, I love you so much. I'm so glad you're here. And you give them a big hug. The other is you scream at them and you say, what the heck were you thinking? Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you, right? This exactly. So what do? They don't say Kohen Gadol. Remember, Mare Kohen, they're so excited when the Kohen comes out in this amazing celebration. Say, what were you doing? Why did you do that to us? We've been worried sick about you. So what does he say? His great reaction, he says, like, what? You think I was doing it for my own sake? I was praying for you. And so the temple won't be destroyed. Amrulo, they said, we understand you were praying for us, which is very nice. But perspective, don't be irregular, don't do this regularly because the Mishnah says you're not supposed to do this. So right? And this is an issue of balance. It's the same story as before, the rain, balance. You want it to be good for the people on the paths, but you also want it to be good for the people who are growing crops. There's always balance in everything. Okay, new Mishnah. We're continuing on with the Kohen Gadol. Mishnital Aron. Once there was no longer an Aron. There was a stone there that was from the time of the Nevi'im Rishonim. Ushtiya Itani Kreit. We're going to get more into the Even Shtiya tomorrow. It was called the Even Ashtiya. It was Gvoham and Arat Shalosh Etzbaot. It was 3 fingers off the ground. Could be that picture they were showing where they put the ketoret on this piece. It looked like a kind of like a stone in the pictures that we saw. That's the Even Ashtiya, basically. That was up 3 etzbaot from the ground, even though it doesn't look like a flat rock. You can look up pictures of it. You can see exactly what it looks like. It's there today. Specifically there, that's the place where he would put it. Remember, there was someone holding the blood and mixing it. He takes the blood from him. We're ready to get to the bloods now. And as he went into the Kodesh Kodashim with the kaf and the machta, he walks out. Now he goes with the blood. If you know the Yishai Rivo song, these are the words of the song, right? So he goes into the place where he went in. He stands in the place where he stood, meaning he takes the exact same path he took the first time he went in. So we don't need to repeat all that. Now he starts the sprinkling. And he sprinkles. We're going to see on Daf Nun Hey where exactly he sprinkles and how he sprinkles. But here they give a little basic. 1 up and then 7 down. He wasn't intending to sprinkle not up or down, but kimatzlif, like a matzlif. We're not going to explain this line yet. This will all come up in the Gemara on Nun Hey. And this is how he would count. He counts 1, meaning the 1 up. Then he does the 7 down. When he counts the 7 down, each time he mentions 1, which is he mentions the one that he already did up, and then he counts the other ones. So he says achat v'achat, meaning I did 1 up, now I'm doing 1 down. Achat v'shtayim, I did 1 up, now I'm doing 2 down. Achat v'shalosh, okay, that's how he does it. We'll get into a machloket about this in the Gemara, also on Nun Hey, and some details about it. Why we do it like this. Now he puts it on a golden stand that was in the hechal, the blood, when he's done with that. So he puts it down on the stand. They bring him the seir. Now he accepts the blood in another bowl, right? He starts from the slaughtering. Same exact thing. He does again the same sprinklings in the same way of the goat's blood. The Mishnah doesn't even bother to say all the words again because we already said. There were 2 stands in the hechal, so he puts it on the second one. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Lo haya sham ela kan echad ovad. There was only one. Natal dama par v'niach dama seir. So he would take off, he would just switch them all the time, right? Whichever one he was done with, right? He would put that one down, pick the other one up. Now we'll get to the machloket between them also on Daf Nun Hey. What exactly is the difference between them? Why did Rabbi Yehuda think there was only one and not two? What was his reason? It'll be on Nun Hey and Nun Vav. It'll take us a little time to figure out. Then Natal Dama Par v'Hiniach Dama Seir. So now he takes again the Dama Pal. He leaves the Dama Seir. So this he did sprinklings inside the Kodesh Kodashim. Now he does sprinklings ala parochet shekeneged ha'aromi bachutz. Now he's standing in the sanctuary, and he has to sprinkle the blood on the parochet, on that curtain, at the spot where the Aron was. Okay, again, he would do it the same way, and then he would count, etc. Natal dam seir v'niach dam apar. So he does that with the dam of the bull. Then he does it with the dam of the seir. Exact same thing with each. Then ira dam apar letoch dam seir. Now he mixes all the bloods together. This is famous. We learned this a few times. This is where we learn the laws. The dam apar is obviously more than the dam seir because there's more blood in the bull than there is in the goat because it's much larger. And you mix them together, and yet it's called the dam seir and the dam apal together. So it shows that min b'mino eino batel. Remember, you don't have laws of nullification. They don't nullify each other, even though they're the same thing. You would think they would nullify if they're the same thing. They don't nullify each other. It's a whole halacha, but not important for our purposes right now. V'natana tamale barikan. You put one into the other, and then you pour it back into the empty one because you want to have it mixed well. With that, we'll finish for today, and we'll start with the Gemara tomorrow on this section. Okay, have a great day, everyone.